Hey, what's going on, everybody? Max here with BB, and today for 10 Minutes Max, we're going to be going over a bit of a hodgepodge of different tickers. So crypto is kind of acting like a piece of crap, while other markets are looking pretty good. So we're going to discuss exactly what could be going on, looking at some US equity index charts, then some maybe crypto pair charts of those equity charts, and then I'm probably going to touch on Bitcoin miners as well. I guess not to spoil the video, but I'm kind of calling bluff on what's happening with crypto today. It feels very random, so hang with me. Should be a good video. Going to cover a lot of different things. And let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it, guys. So first thing you'll notice is that the NASDAQ is ripping again to fresh highs, right? So just looking at my watch list over here, you can see QQQ up, over 0.5%. S&P 500 up 0.5%. The Russell leading the charge up, 0.6%. And then you move down here and you see Bitcoin down -2. You see ETH down -6. Something like Pepe down -8. XRP -4. Doge -8. Sol -7, right? It's like, it's just not really making sense, right? Like there was no news, there was nothing, and then like everything looks really good except for crypto, right? The plague forbidden asset class, right? What were we thinking investing in this new digital renaissance and revolution? We should have just bought Mag 7, right? That's what a lot of us are thinking. Kind of joking on days like today, kind of not joking, but what I'm going to do, and let me preface with this, I did zero planning for this video, which is kind of how I like it. What we're going to do is we're going to see if we can figure out together if this is sort of a one-off day before crypto hopefully recovers, recovers very quickly, uh, into new highs, or if something is truly wrong. So a lot of my time is spent focusing on crypto cycles, right, and U.S. equity cycles, right, to try to stay on the right side of these, higher time frame moves. Today just feels bizarre. It's a little draining. I don't really get it. Doesn't matter. Well, open interest was, screaming high, and it's like, well, yeah, but like, why are we not moving with global markets? So what I want to talk about is like, where could we be at within the cycle, right? Like typically, when would we expect to see that mania commence where like, all right, US equities have been in price discovery for a while now. It's time for crypto to really kind of push forward. So we're going to go over a few things. Let's just start diving into the charts here, okay? So here's the Nasdaq, right? The Nasdaq is kind of like, I don't know. I think of it as like the Bitcoin of US indexes, right? This is where everyone keeps their money. It's been the leader for years. It's very heavily concentrated as an index in, mega cap tech. But then let's move down a little bit here and we'll put down SPX, all right? So here's SPX, all right? So the S&P 500, similar holdings, but the concentration of them is different, right? Like up here, NASDAQ is going to be much more overweight. The Mag 7, like Apple, Amazon, NVIDIA, Google, whatever. S&P is going to be a little bit differently weighted, okay? Now let's pull up IWM, which is US small cap companies, right? So not mega cap tech, more speculative small cap companies. Think of this as like your total 2 or total 3. And then below, we're gonna put down ETH, right? Because the big question at this point in the cycle, Bitcoin's already had a great cycle, will hopefully continue to do well. The big question from here is like, when is ETH finally going to go into price discovery, right? When is ETH finally going to go into price discovery? Because that's what we really need for all of our altcoins to really perform well. So here's QQQ. I'm just going to label them so people don't forget. Here's SPX. Here's IWM, which is US small caps. And then down here we have ETH. All right. So when we look at all these charts, I'm going to put them all in log mode just so we can see them a little bit easier. I want to talk from a cyclical standpoint, like when do we typically see ETH really start to rally, right? Is there any method to the madness at all? All right, so let's move back here and let's mark out the previous cycle, all right? So this was ETH's previous cycle right here. Actually, let me move to the daily just because it's a little squished. All right, so here's the previous cycle. Do previous all-time high. Let's mark out IWM's previous cycle. Previous all-time high. Let's mark out, and I guess we'll just kind of consider like the new cycle beginning because these made new highs, but like it was more or less like this was kind of a giant range, right, over here. So let's just consider getting back above the COVID drop for the S&P and for the NASDAQ, the previous all-time high. All right, just to keep things simple, because that was the important pivot point on the chart where like ETH didn't until way after COVID happened get even close to the all-time high. IWM didn't quite get there. So just to keep things consistent, like what we obviously really care about is getting above those key swing highs, right? All right, so let's zoom in a little bit here. All right, so just a reminder, QQQ up top, S&P down below, IWM US small caps third, and then ETH last, okay? So let's mark out the order of operations in which they went to make a new high. I'm trying to figure out the best way to fit this all on the screen, but let's just do it this way. So QQQ goes on to make a new high, get into price discovery right here. So we'll just put this in blue. And then the S&P went on to make a new all-time high over here. We'll put this in red. And actually, while I'm at it, just because it's going to drive me crazy, we need to make the charts the same color, right? So QQQ blue. We just said SPX will be red, so we'll make the S&P 500 red so that our vertical lines that indicate the crossing into price discovery line up with the chart colors. IWM will make purple. And then we'll add a purple vertical line here for when US small caps went on into price discovery. And then we'll put ETH in its signature Ethereum blue. So slightly different blue, of course, than QQQ. All right, we're already 7 minutes in. I'll keep cooking. And then we'll mark out a vertical line for when ETH finally goes into price discovery. And we'll mark that with the same color blue. Right, so this is kind of the flow of capital right here, right? You can see mega cap tech, obviously first, QQQ, then S&P, a couple months later, and then a couple months after that, you see, US small caps finally joining in, and then after that, another couple months, you see ETH really start to rip in price discovery. And again, ETH is in log mode. This is really how the chart looked, right? So just to be super clear, like this was not a small move, okay? So this is a perfect visualization of the trickle down of capital, right? Like how money rotates out further down the risk curve, right? The safest basket to be in is heavily concentrated mega cap tech. Then, smaller companies with, more equal, equitable weighting, right? And the S&P is definitely very heavily skewed towards tech and big companies as well. But you get what I'm saying. It's less concentrated in a few names than the QQQ or the NASDAQ, the top chart. Then you see it move down the risk curve, into smaller companies, right? So like mid caps, right? Then you see US small caps in purple after that. And then you see crypto, right? So that's the flow of capital. Now let's see what's going on this time around, okay? So let's mark out our previous cycle all-time highs again. So ETH's right here. And people would say, well, ETH already made a new all-time high. Well, it didn't really. It like swept above it by, 0.25% and then immediately rejected, okay? So I'm not counting that. Price discovery is like you actually close like a weekly candle up there or something like that, okay? So let's just finish marking these out here. Previous all-time high. And then previous all-time high. All right, so let's mark these out now. So the NASDAQ went into price discovery over here. And then the S&P went into price discovery over here. So a little bit after. Perfect. And then IWM still hasn't gone into price discovery. I'm not counting that. It did wick above it, but it's about to somewhere over here, right? So like you can see how much longer it's taken this cycle for capital to flow down the risk curve, right? So obviously things are a little bit different than last cycle, where you've seen QQQ and the S&P really performing well, while U.S. small caps and crypto haven't really even gotten near price discovery. So it's been kind of a long and tedious cycle, but it's not anything that we haven't seen before. Now, what I want to really focus in on is this relationship between IWM and ETH specifically, because obviously, QQQ has been in price discovery since, let's just say like end of 2023, 2024. S&P, January, February of 2024, right? So these things are just way, way, way out in front of, risk markets, right? Of risk takers. So let's collapse these and let's just do this. Let's look at IWM specifically, and let's look at ETH. And then we're going to talk about a few other things here, okay? What typically is really, really good for ETH is to see IWM, US small caps, in price discovery. Then very shortly after, ETH begins to ramp aggressively, okay? So IWM is flirting with price discovery. Like we're essentially there. Like we are right under the previous all-time high. If not even today, technically there. Like we're about to, okay? And when that happens, you typically see crypto perform really well. I'll take this out of log mode. You can see what typically happens, right? Or what has happened in the past. And we can go back even another cycle and it's the same thing. This was, the previous cycle all-time high. And then you can see that from here, when IWM gets into price discovery, you can see that ETH starts to ramp, okay? So it's really just capital flowing down the risk curve. And it's about time for U.S. small caps to really begin that ascension. And, hopefully IWM sticks the landing. So I think today is just kind of one of those random outliers where like stocks are down, stocks are up, crypto's down, everything looks good. There's no news, but like you can't really explain it just like on any given day, right? It's just something that happened. So I really wouldn't think that this is like the end of a cycle, right? Like people are being really dramatic online. I would largely ignore them and just say like, we haven't even seen like this move down the risk curve yet. And I think we are more or less primed to see that. So let me move this out of the way now. Let me talk about some other things. I just wanted to point that out that like we are most likely seeing QQQ just aggressively ramp like, one of these things right now. Like towards the end of its cycle, wherever it will end, it could go on for years. You're most likely just going to see QQQ continue to do this, right? And then you will eventually see capital flow further down the risk curve and ETH will catch a big move and beta will catch a big move. That's most likely what's happening right now. So I also want to talk about a Bitcoin miner play. So this is something that I am somewhat interested in here. And I also think this gives a lot of validation to this idea that we are actually still pretty early in the cycle. And this isn't a cycle that's like completely doomed or anything. So this is Riot, one of the older Bitcoin mining companies, if not the oldest. I don't even know what the first publicly traded one was, but certainly Riot is one of the oldest. Let's pull up Bitcoin as well. So late stage Bitcoin cycle or crypto cycle, you typically see altcoins rally. And on top of altcoins rallying, you typically see Bitcoin miners begin to really outperform, which we haven't seen yet this cycle until potentially now. So again, this is Riot up top. This is Bitcoin down below. These moves from Riot are humongous, right? Like from down here in late summer 2017 till the top. Riot rallied, 13x in 4 months. Last cycle, Riot rallied, you know, 25, 26x in, about that same time, depending on where you want to measure it from, right? We could bring it back a little bit. Doesn't matter. Point being is they go crazy. Now, I want to point out when that typically happens. All right, when that typically happens. It's very, very late stage. So let's mark out when these Bitcoin miners, in this specific instance, Riot, has started to just go crazy. Because I'm looking at this chart thinking, it kind of looks like it's about to go crazy. It very much so looks like it's about to go crazy. It's in the later innings of the cycle, as in Bitcoin has put in a majority of its move already. So I'm looking at Riot and I'm like, it trades kind of like, and you could pick any Bitcoin miner company. It's kind of like an others dominance chart. Like specifically last cycle, what we saw was pretty stark, outperformance of beta. And actually, let me even just pull up like Doge and Sol or something, because I think that will give, because people, I think individual tickers can sometimes help people digest it a little bit better than just like an index. I think it jogs the memory a little bit better. So late stage Bitcoin cycle, we see beta start to really rip, right? This was Doge last cycle. This was Riot last cycle. So Riot rallies, blow off 20, 30x, depending where you want to count it from, in 4 months. Over here in the previous cycle, pretty similar, huge move in a very short period of time. And during that same period of time, Doge went up 3,000%, and last cycle, even more, right? 30,000%. And this was all while Bitcoin was like in inning 7 or 8 of 9, right? For baseball terms. So I'm looking at this all together and I'm thinking, yeah, I think today's just kind of like a one-off fluke, right? And not to even truly entertain like the cycle top things, because like every time we dump, everyone's like, nice cycle, bros, gotta go, good game. But I look at this and I'm like, a lot of these historic, or historical like cryptomania, cycles over type of readings, they just simply haven't hit yet. Like we haven't seen ETH, we haven't seen IWM in price discovery, right? So US small caps, which ETH hasn't gone into price discovery. We know that typically US small caps leading ETH is, it's a precursor historically. We haven't seen that yet either. So we haven't seen US small caps in price discovery. We haven't seen ETH in price discovery. We haven't seen Bitcoin miners catch a huge rotation. We haven't seen beta assets like Doge catch a huge rotation. But Bitcoin has been looking pretty good, which is like what it was doing in September, October, November, December of, the 17 cycle and then the 2021 cycle. So I'm looking at this and I'm just thinking like, yeah, probably shouldn't look too much into just one day's price action when IWM really looks like it's about to go into price discovery. But I did want to bring this miner play to your attention. I did explain to our Discord specifically how I am playing this one. I'm not going to talk about the actual position here on YouTube. I think it's just too much to manage trying to keep, 24,000 people on YouTube updated on a very risky out of the money options play. But I am covering that in detail, so it's, it should be a pretty fun play. Hopefully we get some good action on it soon. But I want to actually move over just real quick to the Russell and just see how it's tracking in terms of price discovery. So let's mark out the exact Pico Schmico previous all-time high right here. And then we will zoom way in even more. Yeah, that's technically above the previous all-time high right there, right? So, and then let's be more specific with it. Let's go back to let's go back to last cycle and see specifically what it looked like with ETH from last cycle. So this was the Pico Schmico of actually, no, I need to go back further. It was right here. All right, Pico Schmico all-time high. Previous all-time high. Let us zoom into like the 4-hour. Okay, so this was previous cycle all-time high for IWM. Let's pull up ETH down below. And let's see when that big rotation into ETH happened last cycle. So then this was ETH. I just want to give like a really granular view because I know that people, myself included, typically, you're not watching the weekly time frame when you log in every single day to look at the charts, right? So this is basically what last cycle looked like, right? So you saw the Russell sweep, reject, and then go. Then ETH kind of chopped for another month, and then it really began to ramp. This might be even like too zoomed in. Let's go to like the 12-hour. This is what it looked like last cycle. So you saw the Russell really get into price discovery here, and then ETH very shortly after went into price discovery. Now let's see how things look right now. Previous all-time high. And ETH just kind of having a weird random flush day while the Russell is basically pushing new highs, right? So I think you could potentially just view this like, ETH is, you know, somewhere in like this choppy grind up right here, right? This little choppy grind up just off the highs. I know it wasn't the previous all-time high. It's never going to be perfect. But you're seeing the Russell ramp with ETH just kind of like chopping, ranging, flirting with a breakdown, but probably not actually going to. I think that makes a lot of sense to draw those comparables. And, you know, we're coming into October, which is, you know, October, November, December is typically the most bullish time to be invested in crypto. So assuming that IWM, US small caps, can stick the landing here, I really think it's just a matter of time before the most fun part of the cycle commences. You know, should get at least a couple quarters of froth and all of our bags should pump, right? But it's certainly been a long cycle, right? It's certainly been a long cycle, but hang in there. This is kind of that final domino. The IWM domino is kind of that final, it's like that final domino that needs to fall in order to kick off a major rotation into beta, right? Because IWM is the beta of US equities. It's a beta of TradFi. So once those pumps start happening to small cap companies, it's been a pretty high hit rate that when IWM performs well, crypto performs really well. So anyways, that's it, guys. Hopefully that was a solid video. Just wanted to kind of talk through cycle thoughts here, share with you guys my interest in Bitcoin miners over the coming couple quarters. And yeah, just kind of talk things through. But guys, thanks so much for being here. Like and subscribe, and we will see you guys for another 10-minute max next Monday. Take care.